I wrote down I ranked the eight times that the Leafs have lost a winner-take-all game in the playoffs and ranked them on how much it hurts by the Cutter Index. Now, do note that one of them actually is not a technical everything. There are 7 game 7s, but there is one that is not a game 7 because of the COVID year. The NHL decided to do a 5-game preliminary round. So technically, because it was a do or die game, that counts. So here's my list from 8 to 1, 8 being the least painful and 1 being the most painful. All right. Number 8 on the list is 2019, losing to the Bruins. I couldn't really find anything like super bad about them. Maybe they did blow 1 goal lead in the third period, but I don't think they really had much of a momentum in Game 7 against the Bruins in 2019. I know I was over at my buddy Bill's place and all that, and then once the Leafs lost off the couch, I went plop in shock. Number 7 is 2022. Losing at home to Tampa in Game 7. Now, Tampa were the 2-time defending champs, and the Leafs just couldn't produce offensively. They had a decent show, but Tyler freaking Johnson just had to come out of nowhere and be the hero. Or was it? No, it wasn't him. It wasn't Sorelli. It was someone else who was kind of unknown. I don't know. I forgot who. Carter? No. I was going to say Ryan Carter. No, but the Leafs sucked. Of course, it was a double loss for me. That was the night of my ball hockey tournament, and we sucked that year. And of course, I would suffer another loss as that same night, my orange and white cat Tink passed at 21 years old. So, that was horrible. Number 6 is 2018 with the third period choke. You'd be thinking, well, that's too low. Technically, no, because things were different. So, yeah, the Leafs had a 2-goal lead headed into the third period in Boston. It looked like the Leafs had the momentum and we're going to move on to the next round. But, oh, no, they botched it early in the third period and never looked back. And that was just terrible. Number 5 is the 2020 loss to the Jackets. That's the one example that I did not include in the tops at Game 7. Sure, we lost 7 Game 7s, but this is a winner take all because this was the season COVID hit, and the league decided to have playoff series and would make it a best of 5 preliminary round series. The top 4 teams in each conference would get buys. They would play a round robin among themselves to determine 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the other ones, based off of points percentage, would be ranked. The Leafs ended up facing the Jackets. I think it was the 8-9 game series. But that series was huge because the Leafs choked a 3-goal lead in Game 3 and lost that game. And then Columbus did the same in Game 4, and the Leafs did it. So they traded those. And then Game 5, winner take all, the Leafs just disappeared. And Columbus got in to face Tampa. And then the next Columbus game was that quintuple overtime thriller. Okay, number 4 on the list was last year's overtime loss. Last year's Game 7 loss to Boston. Last year's. The Leafs at least were making it interesting. They were down 3-1. They won Game 5 in overtime in Boston. They won Game 6 at home. And then Game 7 was going to be on Saturday, the same day as my poker event, which I took 3rd place in, which was great. But unfortunately, we lost Game 7 in overtime. It was just shocking. And then, how the Leafs didn't react to the dump in in the first 2 minutes. And then all alone, the goal scored. Pasternak scored all alone, and the Leafs were out of the playoffs. Joseph Woll had played his heart out, but then he got hurt before Game 7, and everyone thought that was a sign of the times, and it was. So practically, yeah, the overtime losses always sting in a Game 7. Ask the St. Louis Blues fans this year. Number 3 was this year's choke job to the Panthers, thinking it's number one because it's the worst Game 7 performance by a home team in history. Well, you could say that, but the other two were just more diabolical, if you ask me. I mean, when you look at things, it's that the Leafs were up 2-0 in the series. It looked good. It was like, okay, then split in Florida. You're up 3-1. See what happens. Maybe lose and maybe win in Game 5 or win Game 6. Don't go to Game 7. And lo and behold, it didn't happen. Florida won the next 3 games. The Leafs won Game 6 in Florida 2-0. It was like, here we go. We're on a momentum swing. And it was 0-0 after one period. And then the ref took that damn stick under his eye. Like, it was gruesome. I nearly lost my snacks with that. And then all of a freaking sudden, the Panthers poured it on 6-1. Jerseys on the ice. Toronto Maple Leafs tradition. But at least we don't riot like Vancouver. But yeah, just pure stupid. And maybe Stolarz, if he was healthy enough, maybe would have played Game 7 or maybe came back. And then, Joseph Woll would not have to feel so bad. And maybe if we lose Stolarz, we lose Stolarz. Big deal. Number 2 is 2021 when the Leafs choked the series to the Montreal Canadiens. The fact of the matter is that it was painful, very painful. I mean, when you're up 3-1, you have to finish it off, no matter what. We hear all the horror stories about many teams blowing 3-1 leads or coming back from 3-1 leads. But in Toronto, this franchise never had a 3-1 lead prior to 21 before 1987. The last time the Leafs were up 3-1 in the series when they did in 2021 against the Habs was 1987. And I was only 2 years old. And that was when the Leafs in the second round or the division finals were up 3-1 on the Detroit Red Wings and 1 win away from going to the Stanley Cup semifinals against Edmonton. Big mistake. They lost the next 3 games. Glenn Hanlon played lights out hockey with a pair of shutouts. Painful. So yeah, 2021 was huge because that was the season in which they went through the 4 divisions and all that. But the divisions were kind of different because for the Leafs, they played every one of the other 6 Canadian teams. So usually you obviously don't have all 7 Canadian teams in the same division. Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg are in the different conference than Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. But yeah, they paired it up. All because Canada refused to let people cross the border and all that. So what ends up happening is that, because of the travel restrictions, the Canadian teams could not go to the States and all that. So what they did was set up divisional playoffs, and a Canadian team could face an American team only in the Final Four. And of course, restrictions have to be done. Yeah. So the Leafs were the best team of the Canadian squads. They took on Montreal, who just snuck in ahead of, I think, Calgary. But yeah, Leaf fans were happy because, Canadians are a hater rival, and we last faced them in a playoff series in 1979 and got swept by them. Larry Robinson, former Kitchener Ranger, with the overtime dagger. But the fact of the matter is that, it was just not fun and all that. Just not fun. So, yeah, up 3-1, lost Game 1 thanks to Paul Byron's acrobatic goal, which I admit was fantastic. We won the next 3 games, and then in Game 5 in overtime, Galchenyuk, we had him, and then he ended up passing the puck to a Montreal Canadian player. He probably forgot what team he played for, and then they scored to make it a Game 6 in Montreal. And then fans were allowed in Montreal, just like a few thousand fans. And then practically those fans helped Montreal out. Toronto had the momentum in Game 6 overtime, and it looked like the jinx was over for the Leafs making it to the second round. But then all of a sudden we couldn't do it. We lost in overtime, and then Game 7 happened. And that's just pure bad luck. So anyway, yeah, that was a choke job. And number 1, nothing can compare to the first Game 7 of that drought, 2013. Nothing can compare to that. So the story of the 2013 Leafs was that, it was a strike shortened season because of a lockout, and then the Leafs just got lucky and all that and made it to the playoffs for the first time since the full lockout of 2005. The Leafs, I believe at the time, were the second last team to make the playoffs. Well, after the lockout, the 2005 full season lockout, I think Florida was the only other team. Or was it Edmonton? No, obviously not Edmonton, but yeah. No, Florida beat us to it. That's right, because in 2012. Nevertheless, the Leafs, 2013, great times by all, but then all the effing sudden, the Leafs just choked it away. And, well, the Leafs were down 3-1. Everyone thought that Boston would have Toronto's stuff. It could have been different because if the Bruins had beaten the Senators on the final day of the schedule, then the Leafs would have played the Habs and it would have been Bruins Sens. But no, it wasn't. It was Leafs Bruins. Bruins were up 3-1. Leaf fans were not so sure. And then a pair of wins, including we didn't win in overtime. But anyway, the Leafs were now going to Game 7 on a Monday. On a Monday night, the same night as the Rangers taking on the Caps in Game 7. I was watching Rangers Caps Game 7 because I was invested in that one, and I had a funny feeling the Leafs were going to lose. Rangers crushed Washington 5-0, so I decided to change channels to the Leafs Bruins. Leafs were up 4-2, and I'm thinking, okay, great. Leafs are going to pull a rabbit out of the hat and come back from 3-1 down. No, it's so fast. They give up 2 goals in the last minute, 4-4, and then Bergeron in overtime. Game over, Leafs lose and become the first team to blow a 3-goal lead in the third period in a Game 7 in a winner-take-all game. The simple fact was that it was just not meant to be and all that. And, that was just painful. That's very painful. I mean, when you blow a 3-goal lead in a Game 7, you don't deserve to move on and all that.